Do you want to know what one of the biggest factors is in the success of modern marketing and sales? It's the position of content manager. Not what you're expecting? You're probably not alone. But this position is the secret weapon to accelerating traffic, leads, and sales. Still not convinced? We have one of our expert coaches, Brian Casey, here today to tell us just why the content manager is so important. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Austin.
It's great to see you. I just have some questions about a content manager. Start us off with the basics. What exactly is a content manager and why do we need one?
It's easy to get caught up in like the tasks associated with the role, but really the way that I like to think about it is the content manager is going to be the forward-facing voice for your company. That's going to come across in a couple different ways. Generally speaking, we're talking about article content, so content that's going to bring people to your site. We're also talking about the copy on your website, so the copy that people read to really understand like who you are, what you do, what problems you solve. The content manager is generally going to be the person behind the scenes working that as well. You can even leverage a content manager for email marketing. Anything that has a written voice component to it, the content manager is your person that's going to be able to really manage all those efforts for you.
That makes sense. So, having that specialized person writing all that stuff, it's going to come out sounding a lot better than someone who doesn't have those writing skills. But is it something that really needs 40 hours a week? Is that really worth a full-time employee just to be writing?
If we were to break down the content managers that we work with at Impact, the most critical thing that typically is the hardest hurdle to overcome is writing 3 articles a week. There's a lot that goes into writing 3 articles a week. You're talking about interviewing people on your team, so you don't have AI written content that's going to be massively overproduced and completely void of actual human intelligence, which your reader and your audience is going to be able to understand. You're talking about taking edits and feedback. You're talking about doing research from an SEO standpoint, from a planning standpoint. There's a lot that goes into writing an article that not a lot of people think about unless you start to write them yourselves. You figure out pretty quickly, writing 3 articles is a tough task. So the best content managers that we work with, they're able to do 3 articles a week. And then based on the efficiencies of them being able to do that on a consistent basis, they can start to do some of these other tasks. But it's difficult to even do 3 articles a week. All the good content managers do it without doubt. It's not a concern of, are we going to be able to get this? It's a full-time role, and people struggle to get to that 3 articles a week, and that's a piece of the role.
That does make sense. So you're talking about these 3 articles a week. What kind of content should this person be creating?
It's a good question. Ultimately, the content that this person needs to create has to be revenue driving. And there's any number of ways that you can think about revenue driving content. But the content that's going to be written by AI, the content that's going to be written by someone who's not an expert in your space. So let's say you're thinking like, I'm going to outsource the writing. Some third party is going to write this content for me. Guaranteed you're going to be reading it and you're going to be like, this is awful. This does not sound like us. This doesn't sound like an expert. This is literally just research content that someone put together and accumulated a bunch of facts and put them in an article, and it doesn't read like we wrote it. And as we're thinking about the type of content you got to create, you have to have content that drives revenue. A piece of driving revenue is you have to leverage your team. And when you're leveraging your team, your sales team is a really great resource. They know the common questions that people are going to ask when they're in the sales process. They know the common concerns, fears, worries, doubts people are going to have. Those are really great questions to get ahead of before they become these moments of paralysis in the sales process. So I would always recommend starting there first is what are all the gaps that we have in our sales process, or where do people fall out of our sales funnel? And all of this helps from a revenue standpoint because you're building trust. All of this is trust building content. You become the most trusted voice in your space, which is kind of the language that we use, by covering these topics that not a lot of people want to talk about.
Not only are you getting out those articles for people to be drawn into, but those articles are really helpful in helping them make the buying decision, like you said, to bring in that revenue. When you're looking for a content manager, and I know you've helped a lot of businesses helped a lot of businesses find their content manager, what specifically should you be looking for? Are there traits? And then what can someone expect to pay like an entry-level content manager?
ultimately what we've seen is hiring someone out of school with a journalism degree is a really good path to follow. They don't have a lot of habits that they've learned in writing for other companies or organizations or agencies. You can really take that and mold them into what it is that you want. So think about the type of salary in your general location. California is going to be different than North Carolina is, than Alabama is. But think about like an entry-level marketing specialist. Like, what would that give you? I can say like here in like the South, like somewhere between like $50,000 and $60,000 is a good starting range to think about. If you're in some place that has a much higher cost of living, obviously account for that as you're thinking about it. But this is not going to be a six-figure salary or anything along those lines if you're hiring someone that's relatively new to work experience. In terms of things to look for, the skills are really helpful. The skills that you can learn from an SEO standpoint, from like a technical writing standpoint, those things are all really, really helpful. The soft skills are really what has to be true in order to have a great content manager. So we're talking about someone who has a passion for writing. We're talking about someone who is a lifelong learner. And we're talking about someone who has no problems and actually thrives under deadlines and getting things done. That person's going to thrive in the role because they're going to want to learn all the things that they're going to need to know from a skill standpoint.
That makes sense. They'll get in there and they'll just get after it. That's cool. Do you have any other general tips for those wondering about content writers for us?
We've hinted at it a little bit today, but like the conversation around AI and AI utilization of writing, and can AI just be my writer? Do I actually have to bring on this person? The general sentiment that I have is there's probably a space right now where AI can write content and it's not going to be flagged by Google, not like a manual penalty or anything, but it's not going to be something where you're going to be penalized necessary for it. And what we know to be true is trust is a part of every single transaction. And if you have this artificial intelligence writing for you, you're relying on just publicly sourced information and the amalgamation of that information into one article. There's not a ton of tone, voice, personality. There's not a ton of actual subject matter expertise built into it. And that's what when we've seen content thrive, is when it doesn't look like every other piece of content out there. When it does bring a unique vantage point or some unique like research or some unique in-house expertise that you have to the table. Content managers could and should utilize AI from an efficiency standpoint, but I would have no concerns about like AI outsourcing the writing component of it if that's something that, future-facing CEOs are thinking about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because, as humans, we're drawn to things that are new, interesting, sides we've never heard, where AI a lot of times is just pulling from general knowledge. So having that person in there to pull the expertise out of subject matter experts, that's huge. Even if they use, like they should, AI to be more efficient in doing so. Well, thanks, Brian. I appreciate you bringing your knowledge today, and we'll see you soon on the next one.
Yeah, man. Good talking to you also.
At the end of the day, your content is only as good as the person behind it. So remember that this position is super important and deserves a lot of respect. When given the opportunity and training, your content manager will quickly accumulate the knowledge and expertise you want them to possess simply by doing their job. Do you need help finding, hiring, and then coaching a content manager? Call us today and talk to one of our coaches just like Brian to see how we can help.